are, acting like you belong here.
Diane's voice snapped as she stepped closer, her manicured finger cutting through the air inches from Elijah's chest.
This isn't your kind of place. Pack it up before I have you removed.
The metal tongs in his hand hovered over the flames, heat biting into his skin, while the sharp scent of her perfume pressed in like a warning.
You don't belong here anyway. I've already called the police,
she added, louder now, her voice rising as if she needed an audience.
And you'd better be gone before they get here.
Elijah's grip tightened just slightly, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on her without a word, as the grill hissed behind him. Diane took a step back, folding her arms, watching him like she'd already won, completely unaware she'd just summoned authorities to confront the one man whose authority could unravel her in seconds. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The afternoon sun warmed Judge Elijah Monroe's shoulders as he stood at the grill in his new backyard. Smoke drifted up in lazy curls from the sizzling burgers and hot dogs. He flipped a burger with his metal tongs, savoring the familiar hiss and pop. "Smells amazing, Dad," Tanya called from the patio table where she arranged paper plates and plastic cups. Her doctor's hands moved with quick precision, even with something as simple as setting up a family barbecue. Elijah nodded, feeling a moment of peace. At 62, after losing Nadine just 8 months ago, these small moments mattered more than ever. Moving to Hawthorne Ridge had been Tanya's idea, a fresh start in a nice neighborhood closer to her and Noah. The gated community with its perfect lawns wasn't really his style, but the backyard was spacious and the house had good bones. "Grandpa, watch!" Noah, his 11-year-old grandson, tossed a football high into the air and caught it with a dramatic dive onto the grass. His laughter rang out, bright and clear. "Nice catch, buddy," Elijah called. "Just save some energy for these burgers. They'll be ready in 5. From the corner of his eye, Elijah noticed a few neighbors watching from their yards. An older couple smiled tentatively from their deck. A man watering his plants lifted a hand in a half-wave. This was good, Elijah thought. Normal. Maybe this place would work out after all. The peace shattered when the gate to the wooden fence swung open. A woman in her early 60s with perfectly styled blonde hair and large sunglasses marched toward him. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her shoulders tight with purpose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the backyard chatter. "Who gave you permission to use this yard?" Elijah turned, tongs still in hand. "I'm sorry?" "This yard," she repeated, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Who authorized your gathering here?" Elijah blinked, keeping his face neutral despite the sudden tension in his chest. "Ma'am, I'm Elijah Monroe. I moved in yesterday. This is my house." The woman pushed her sunglasses up into her hair, revealing cold blue eyes that scanned him from head to toe. "That's not possible. I'm Diane Bellamy, president of the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association, and I wasn't informed of any sale to—" She paused, her gaze flicking between Elijah, Tanya, and Noah. "To your family." Tanya stepped forward, her relaxed posture transforming in an instant. "My father closed on this house 2 weeks ago. There's absolutely no requirement to inform you personally of a private real estate transaction." Diane's eyes narrowed. "There most certainly is. All new residents must be approved by the HOA board before moving in. It's in the bylaws." "That's not true," Elijah said calmly. "I reviewed all documents thoroughly before signing. There's a notification requirement, which my realtor handled." "Well, something clearly went wrong," Diane sniffed. "And regardless, there are rules about noise levels, smoke pollution, and unauthorized gatherings. You're in violation of at least 3 HOA regulations right now." Noah had stopped playing. The football clutched against his chest as he edged closer to Tanya. His smile had vanished. "Ms. Bellamy," Elijah said, keeping his voice level. "This is a family barbecue on a Saturday afternoon. The noise level is reasonable, and there's no regulation against cooking outdoors. The smoke is drifting into my yard," Diane snapped, "and that music is far too loud." The radio on the porch was barely audible, playing old jazz at a whisper. "And who are all these people?" she demanded, gesturing to Tanya and Noah. "Hawthorne Ridge has strict rules about overnight guests." "These people," Tanya said, stepping closer, "are his daughter and grandson, and we're not overnight guests. We're family visiting for dinner." Diane's face flushed with color. "I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate you barging into my father's backyard and treating him like an intruder," Tanya fired back. Elijah set his hand gently on Tanya's shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly, before turning back to Diane. "Ms. Bellamy, I understand you have concerns, but I assure you everything is in order with my purchase. If you'd like to discuss this another time—" "Another time?" Diane's voice rose. "You're disturbing the entire neighborhood right now. I've had 3 complaints already about the smoke and the strangers walking through our gates." Elijah tightened his grip on the tongs, feeling the weight of them in his hand. In 30 years on the federal bench, he had faced down hardened criminals with more respect than this woman was showing him in his own yard. Noah edged behind Tanya, his eyes wide and uncertain. Elijah felt a flash of anger. This was supposed to be a good day, their first meal together in the new house. Diane's gaze fixed on the tongs in Elijah's hand. Something shifted in her expression, a calculated hardening. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she announced, her finger hovering over the screen. "I don't feel safe with you waving that metal object around." Elijah looked down at the grilling tongs, then back at Diane's cold eyes. The absurdity of it struck him, even as the seriousness of her threat sank in. "Ms. Bellamy," he began. "Don't come any closer," she warned, stepping back toward the fence. "I'm calling them right now. I don't know who you really are or how you got in here, but this neighborhood has standards." Diane pressed her phone to her ear, her face a mask of exaggerated fear. The barbecue smoke curled upward into the clear blue sky as silence fell across Elijah's backyard. "Yes? Emergency services?" Diane's voice rose dramatically. "There's a suspicious man in the yard next door to mine. A black man I've never seen before." She paused, listening. "Yes, he's holding some kind of metal object. Tongs or something. He's refusing to leave." Elijah's guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. The joy that had filled the yard moments ago evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. "Everyone stay calm," Elijah said quietly. His words carried weight, steady and measured. "This will be sorted out." Tanya stepped toward Diane, her hands shaking with rage. "Are you serious right now? You're standing right here lying to the police." "He's becoming aggressive," Diane continued into the phone, ignoring Tanya completely. "Yes, there are others with him. I feel threatened in my own neighborhood." "That's a lie," Tanya's voice broke with frustration. "He hasn't moved an inch. He hasn't even raised his voice." Noah gripped Tanya's hand, his small fingers digging into her palm. His eyes were wide with confusion and fear. He'd never seen adults act this way. Never witnessed someone tell such bold-faced lies about his grandfather. "Mom?" Noah whispered, his voice thin with worry. "Why is she saying those things about Grandpa?" Tanya pulled Noah closer, wrapping her arm protectively around his shoulders. "Because she's a hateful woman, baby," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. Across the fence on the other side of Elijah's yard, an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair stepped onto her back porch. Marisol Reyes watched the scene unfold, her lined face creased with concern. She folded her arms across her chest, her presence a quiet witness. "Yes, please hurry," Diane said into the phone, her eyes never leaving Elijah. A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I don't know what he might do next." Elijah looked at the tongs in his hand. Simple grilling tongs he'd used at countless family gatherings over the years. With deliberate slowness, he placed them beside the grill. The gesture was clear, removing even the flimsiest excuse for escalation. "Judge, maybe we should call someone," one of Elijah's guests suggested. "A friend from his law school days. This is ridiculous." "No," Elijah said firmly. "Let's not complicate things. The officers will arrive. We'll explain the situation, and this misunderstanding will be cleared up." But Tanya wasn't satisfied with patience. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Dad. She's deliberately lying to the police about you. She's putting you in danger." "Tanya," Elijah said, his voice a calm in the growing storm, "take Noah inside, please." "No way. I'm not leaving you out here alone." Noah pressed himself against Tanya's side, his eyes darting between his mother, his grandfather, and the strange, angry woman at the fence. Diane finished her call with a final plea for quick response. She slipped her phone back into her handbag, triumph written across her features. She believed she had won, that her word would carry more weight than Elijah's. "The police will be here shortly," she announced, as if doing them all a service. "They'll sort this out." "Yes, they will," Elijah replied evenly. In the distance, sirens wailed. The sound cut through the neighborhood like a knife, growing louder with each passing second. Marisol Reyes disappeared briefly into her house, then returned to her porch with something in her hand, a small camera. She lifted it, pointing it toward Diane and Elijah's yard. The sirens grew closer, louder, more urgent. Elijah stood tall in the yard he had purchased after decades of hard work. The yard where he had planned to make new memories after losing his beloved Nadine. Now he was being treated like an intruder in his own space, and the humiliation stung worse than any courtroom defeat he'd ever experienced. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt outside Elijah's house. Car doors slammed. Radio static crackled. Diane's smile widened as heavy footsteps approached the side gate. Without a knock, without a call, without any request for permission, Officer Grant Phelps pushed open the gate and entered Elijah's backyard, his hand resting on his holster. Officer Phelps strode into the backyard like he owned it, his shoulders square and his eyes hard. The second officer hung back, watching from the gate. Diane pointed a manicured finger at Elijah from across the fence. "That's him, officer," she said loudly. "I don't believe he belongs here." Phelps took in the scene, the smoking grill, the half-set table, the frightened faces, and immediately focused on Elijah. His hand hadn't moved from his holster. "Step away from the grill, sir," Phelps ordered. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Elijah raised his hands slowly, palms open. The familiar weight of injustice settled on his shoulders, but his face betrayed nothing. 62 years had taught him when showing emotion could cost him everything. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding," Elijah said calmly. "This is my home." Tanya stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. "He owns this house. This woman is harassing us during a family barbecue." Phelps turned sharply toward her. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and not interfere. I'm handling this situation." "Handling what situation?" Tanya demanded. "We're cooking in our own backyard." "Last warning," Phelps said, his voice hardening. "Back up, or you'll be detained for obstructing an officer." The guests exchanged horrified glances. One couple moved toward the gate, clearly wanting no part of this. The smoke from the grill grew thicker as the unattended burgers began to char. The smell changed from mouth-watering to acrid. Noah pressed himself against Tanya's side, eyes wide and frightened. His small hand clutched his mother's shirt. "Is Grandpa in trouble?" he whispered. Diane folded her arms across her chest. "Officer, I find it very suspicious how this house changed hands. The HOA was never properly informed of new ownership, especially ownership of this nature." "What nature would that be, Mrs. Bellamy?" Elijah asked quietly. She ignored him, speaking only to Phelps. "We have standards in Hawthorne Ridge. Procedures." Phelps nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Sir, I'll need to see some identification." The request hung in the air. Elijah felt every eye on him. His frightened grandson, his fuming daughter, his embarrassed guests, his new neighbors peering from windows and porches. The humiliation burned worse than any courtroom defeat. After decades of upholding the law, he was being treated like a criminal in his own backyard. "My wallet is in my back pocket," Elijah said evenly. "I'm going to reach for it now." "Slowly," Phelps warned. Elijah removed his wallet with deliberate care. He extracted his driver's license and held it out. Phelps took it, studying the card with narrowed eyes. "This address matches," he said, sounding almost disappointed. 241 Magnolia Lane." "Yes," Elijah said, "because I live here. I purchased this home 3 weeks ago." Diane shook her head vigorously. "There must be some mistake. The HOA would have been notified about any new residents." "There was no mistake, Mrs. Bellamy," Elijah replied. "The sale was completely legitimate." Phelps handed the license back, his expression annoyed rather than apologetic. He didn't like being wrong, and he certainly didn't like being called out for a mistake. "Well, everything seems to be in order then," he said stiffly. Noah had begun to cry silently, tears tracking down his cheeks. His small shoulders shook with the effort of staying quiet. He tugged on Tanya's shirt. "Are they going to take Grandpa away?" he whispered, voice breaking. The sound of his grandson's fear cut through Elijah's careful composure. This was not a moment he could simply endure. This was a moment that would shape Noah's understanding of the world, of justice, of his own worth. Elijah had spent his life making sure the scales of justice remained balanced. He would not allow them to be tipped here, in front of the child he loved. With measured movements, Elijah reached into his inner jacket pocket. Phelps tensed instantly. "Keep your hands visible." "I'm retrieving something else, Officer Phelps," Elijah said, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had silenced countless courtrooms. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a leather credential wallet and opened it, revealing the gold badge and identification card within. He held it toward Phelps, whose eyes widened as he read the credentials. "Officer Phelps," Elijah said, his deep voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard, "I am Judge Elijah Monroe of the United States District Court." The backyard froze as Officer Phelps read Elijah's federal credentials. His eyes widened, and his posture changed instantly. The badge glinted in the sunlight, reflecting its golden authority across Phelps' suddenly pale face. "Judge Monroe," Phelps stammered, his voice losing its commanding edge. "I apologize for the confusion. If you had known my position," Elijah interrupted calmly, "would that have changed how you treated me in my own home?" Phelps swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool breeze. The other officer, who had remained by the gate, took a small step backward. "Sir, we were responding to a call about a potential trespasser," Phelps said, his tone now deferential. "Standard procedure dictates—" "Standard procedure," Elijah said, "does not include entering private property without permission or probable cause." His voice remained level, but carried weight that seemed to press Phelps into the ground. "Mrs. Bellamy made a false report. She claimed I was trespassing in my own yard." Diane stepped forward. A forced smile plastered across her face. "This is all just a silly misunderstanding," she said with an artificial laugh. "I was concerned about smoke and noise in a usually quiet neighborhood. I didn't realize Judge Monroe had purchased the Wilson property." Elijah turned to face her directly. His eyes were steady, his expression composed but unyielding. "No, Mrs. Bellamy," he said, each word precise and clear. "It was a choice. You chose to assume I didn't belong here. You chose to lie to the police. You chose to put my family at risk." The words hung in the air. Neighbors who had gathered at the edges of their yards heard him. Some looked down, uncomfortable. Others watched, with newfound respect. Tanya knelt beside Noah, wiping tears from his cheeks while shooting daggers at Diane with her eyes. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Grandpa is fine. No one is going anywhere." Phelps cleared his throat. "We'll, note the situation in our report." He gestured to his partner, both of them backing toward the gate. "Again, sorry for the confusion, Judge. I expect this incident will be documented accurately," Elijah said, "including the unauthorized entry onto my property." "Yes, sir." Phelps nodded. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. He and his partner retreated through the gate, closing it carefully behind them. Diane lingered a moment longer, her smile fading to a tight line. She looked at Elijah, then at the neighbors watching, before turning without another word and marching back to her own property. The guests stood awkwardly around the abandoned grill. The food had burned, smoke rising from charred meat. Someone turned the music back on, but the cheerful rhythm felt hollow now. "I'm sorry about your first barbecue," said an elderly woman who lived across the street. "That wasn't right." Others nodded. A few approached Elijah to introduce themselves properly. The gathering limped along for another hour, but the celebration had turned into something more somber, a shared witness to injustice. By evening, the guests had gone, and Elijah sat at his kitchen table with Tanya and Noah. The house that was meant to be a fresh start now felt tainted. "You need to file complaints," Tanya insisted, pacing the kitchen floor. "Against that woman and against the police. They had no right to treat you like that." Noah sat quietly, his tablet untouched beside him, eyes still puffy from crying. "I will," Elijah said, "but I want to document everything carefully first. Times, exact words, who was present." He pulled a legal pad toward him and began writing in his precise handwriting. "Rushing creates mistakes. Mistakes create escape routes. This is why you're the judge, and I'm not," Tanya said with a sigh. "I'd be ready to burn it all down." "Justice isn't about burning," Elijah replied. "It's about illuminating, exposing what's hidden." Noah finally spoke, his voice small. "Why did she call the police on you, Grandpa?" Elijah set down his pen. "How do you explain prejudice to an 11-year-old? How do you tell him the world isn't always fair without crushing his spirit? Some people make judgments based on what they see, not who they know," he said carefully. "Mrs. Bellamy made wrong assumptions about me." "Because you're black?" Noah asked directly. Elijah nodded slowly. "Yes, but what matters is how we respond. With dignity, with truth." As darkness fell, they heard a car door slam outside. Elijah rose to peek through the curtains. Diane's silhouette moved across his front yard, retreating quickly back to her own house. "What was that about?" Tanya asked. "I'm not sure," Elijah replied. The answer came the next morning. When Elijah opened his front door to collect the newspaper, he found a white envelope taped to the door. Inside was an official HOA violation notice, listing multiple infractions: unauthorized gathering, excessive smoke, noise disturbance, improper outdoor equipment. At the bottom, a flowing signature: Diane Bellamy, President, Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association. That same evening, Elijah sat at his kitchen table reading Diane's HOA notice. The paper trembled slightly in his steady hands, not from fear, but from a quiet, controlled anger he rarely allowed himself to feel. $500? Tanya's voice rose as she paced behind him. For a barbecue? This is insane. Elijah adjusted his reading glasses, studying each line of the notice. Unauthorized gathering, excessive smoke, noise disturbance, improper outdoor equipment, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain neighborhood harmony. Neighborhood harmony? Tanya stopped pacing. Is that even a real violation? According to Section 12, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws, it is. Elijah tapped the fine print at the bottom of the page. Noah stood in the hallway, half hidden in shadow, watching the adults with wide eyes. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but he couldn't make himself walk away. The worry on his grandfather's face scared him more than Diane or the police had. "Dad, this is harassment," Tanya said. "We need to call an attorney right now." Elijah set the notice down. Diane's smart. She's switched from police intimidation to bureaucracy. Harder to fight, easier to deny. But it's still wrong. Tanya grabbed her phone. "Let me call Jamie from law school. She handles housing discrimination." A soft knock at the back door interrupted her. All three of them froze, the memory of earlier intrusions still raw. Through the kitchen window, they could make out the small figure of Marisol Reyes on the back porch, clutching something to her chest. Elijah stood and opened the door. "Marisol, please come in." The older woman stepped inside, her gray hair neatly pinned back. "I saw her tape that notice to your door this morning," she said without preamble. "I've been debating all day whether to come." "I'm glad you did," Elijah replied. "This is my daughter Tanya, and my grandson, Noah." Marisol nodded to them both. "I brought you something." She set a worn manila folder on the table. It bulged with papers, some corners bent, others poking out haphazardly. "Evidence," she said simply. Elijah opened the folder. Inside were dozens of HOA notices, photographs, and handwritten statements, dating back nearly 8 years. "What is all this?" Tanya asked, leaning over her father's shoulder. "History," Marisol said, pulling out a chair. She sat down heavily, as if the weight of the folder had transferred to her shoulders. "Diane's history in Hawthorne Ridge." Elijah spread the documents across the table. They told a story of systematic targeting, violation notices for minor infractions, escalating fines, threatening letters. "Maria Delgado," Marisol said, pointing to a photo of a smiling Filipino woman. "Nurse at County General, cited for improper holiday decorations 3 times in 1 month. Then, landscaping violations, though her yard was immaculate." She pulled out another paper. "James Washington, retired postal worker. Black man like yourself, Judge. Moved in 4 years ago. 26 violations in 6 months. What happened to them?" Elijah asked quietly. "They sold. Most do." Marisol's voice held a bitter edge. "The Rodriguez family lasted longest, almost 2 years of fighting. But their contracting business suffered when Diane started telling neighbors not to hire them. More papers emerged. A Latino family cited for cultural gatherings. 3 elderly widows fined for maintenance issues. They couldn't possibly fix themselves. She picks her targets," Marisol continued. "People of color, single women, anyone she thinks won't or can't fight back." Noah had crept closer during this exchange, now standing at the edge of the table. He stared at the photos of families who had once lived in the homes around them, families who were gone now. "Why didn't anyone stop her?" Tanya asked, her voice tight with anger. "Some tried," Marisol sighed, "but Diane has connections at City Hall. Her late husband was some big developer. And this neighborhood," she gestured vaguely. Most people just want peace. They look away. Elijah nodded slowly, absorbing this information with the careful consideration of a judge weighing evidence. But you didn't look away, Marisol. You kept records. Fat lot of good they did, she said. Until now, maybe. Why help us? Tanya asked. Marisol's eyes hardened. Because I'm tired of watching good people driven out by a bully. Because I should have done more before. And because you... She looked directly at Elijah. You're not afraid of her. Noah finally spoke, his small voice cutting through the room. Grandpa, can the police come back? Because of these papers? The adults fell silent, suddenly remembering the boy's presence. Elijah pushed back his chair and opened his arms. Noah came to him, and Elijah pulled him close. No, son, he said firmly, looking into Noah's eyes. I promise you, nobody will use fear that way again. Not against us, not against anyone in this neighborhood. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Elijah's home office, casting thin stripes across his methodical work. He sat at his desk, surrounded by 3 distinct piles: Diane's HOA violation notice on the left, Marisol's folder of past incidents in the center, and his own carefully written timeline of the police confrontation on the right. His reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he wrote in his precise, judicial handwriting. Dad? Tanya appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of coffee. She stepped inside, setting the steaming cup next to him. You've been in here since dawn. Elijah looked up, offering a small smile. Thank you. Just getting my ducks in a row. Tanya peered over his shoulder at the formal letter he was drafting. Request for HOA records and documentation, she read aloud. You're going full judge mode on them. I'm going full citizen mode, Elijah corrected, his voice level. Every homeowner has the right to review these records. I'm simply exercising mine. The letter requested comprehensive documentation, 5 years of fine histories, violation notices categorized by homeowner, meeting minutes, complaint logs, and the complete enforcement rules with any amendments. Elijah had cited relevant state statutes governing homeowners associations and records access. You think they'll actually hand all this over? Tanya asked, skepticism evident in her tone. They're legally obligated to. He put down his pen and turned to face her. If they refuse, that tells us something too. Tanya paced the small office, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She'll retaliate, Dad. Diane already has Noah afraid to play in the backyard. What's next? More police calls? Getting Noah in trouble at school? That woman has no limits. Elijah's expression remained calm, though his eyes reflected understanding of his daughter's fears. Tanya, I've spent 40 years in courtrooms watching people try to hide their actions. The loudest ones usually have the most to hide. He tapped the folder from Marisol. Diane's had free rein because people were too intimidated to challenge her. But evidence matters more than outrage. I'm just worried about Noah. So am I, Elijah said softly. That's why we do this carefully, thoroughly. We document everything. By early afternoon, Elijah had delivered his formal request to the HOA secretary's mailbox and emailed a copy to all board members. 2 hours later, the neighborhood email list pinged with a message from Diane Bellamy. Emergency HO meeting, tonight. 7 p.m. topic, safety and community standards. All residents strongly encouraged to attend. Tanya read the email from her phone. Well, that didn't take long. Good, Elijah said simply. The Hawthorne Ridge clubhouse buzzed with an unusual number of residents by 6:50 that evening. Elijah, Tanya, and Marisol arrived together, drawing curious glances from neighbors who had witnessed or heard about the barbecue incident. They took seats near the front, Elijah nodding politely to those he passed. At precisely 7 hours, Diane swept in wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and pearls, followed by 4 board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable. She took her place at the podium, arranging her notes with perfectly manicured hands. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice trembling slightly, a performance of vulnerability that Elijah immediately recognized from countless witness testimonies. "Recent events have made it necessary to address concerns about our community's safety and standards." For the next 15 minutes, Diane wove a masterful narrative. She spoke of her 15 years serving the neighborhood, her dedication to maintaining property values, and her deep concern when she observed unusual activity at a nearby property. Without directly mentioning Elijah, she described feeling threatened when confronted by an angry man holding a metal object, and how she simply followed safety protocols. "I had no idea he was a federal judge," she said, finally looking directly at Elijah. "And I certainly never expected he would use his position of power to intimidate ordinary residents who were just trying to protect their community." Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded along with Diane's version of events. When she finally paused, Elijah slowly rose from his seat. The room fell silent. "Mrs. Bellamy," he said, his deep voice carrying easily without raising it, "I have a simple question for the board." "This isn't a Q&A session, Judge Monroe," Diane replied quickly. "I believe most HOA meetings allow member comments," he countered. "Unless the bylaws have recently changed." A female board member nodded reluctantly. "He's right, Diane. Members get 5 minutes." Elijah nodded his thanks. "My question is straightforward. In the past 5 years, how many white homeowners in Hawthorne Ridge have been fined for barbecuing in their backyards?" The question hung in the air. Board members exchanged glances. One shuffled papers nervously. "That's not relevant," Diane snapped. "It seems quite relevant," Elijah replied, "as do the 26 violations issued to Mr. Washington or the improper cultural gatherings cited for the Rodriguez family." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Diane's composure cracked slightly. "We don't keep records by race," another board member offered weakly. "Perhaps you should," Elijah said. "It might reveal interesting patterns." Diane abruptly gathered her notes. "This meeting is adjourned. We'll reschedule when we can have a productive discussion without baseless accusations." As residents filtered out of the clubhouse, many lingered in small groups, voices low but animated. Elijah stood with Tanya and Marisol near the entrance, accepting quiet thanks from several neighbors who had never spoken to him before. Diane approached as they prepared to leave, stepping close enough that only they could hear her words. "Judge Monroe," she said, her voice hard and cold, dropping all pretense of vulnerability. "Hawthorne Ridge has ways of protecting itself from people who don't understand how things work here. This won't end well for you." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, creating pools of gold on the granite countertops. Tanya sat at the island, her coffee steaming beside her tablet. Her face, usually composed after years of emergency room crises, twisted with anger. "Dad," she called, her voice tight. "You need to see this." Elijah looked up from his newspaper and crossed the kitchen. "What is it?" "Hawthorne Ridge Community Forum," she said, sliding the tablet toward him. "Someone posted about you last night." The headline read, "Federal Judge Threatens Resident Over Minor Safety Concern." Below it, a lengthy post described how a power-hungry newcomer had terrorized a long-time respected resident, who had simply raised concerns about unsafe barbecuing practices. Elijah's jaw tightened as he read. The article twisted every fact, painting Diane as a frightened woman and himself as an angry bully, using his position to silence legitimate neighborhood concerns. "There's no name on this," he said, scrolling to the bottom. "It's Diane," Tanya snapped. "Who else?" Elijah nodded. "Most likely, or someone close to her." He scrolled to the comments section and felt his stomach drop. Dozens of responses, most from anonymous accounts, piled on with increasing venom. These people always play the race card when they don't get their way. If he can't follow simple neighborhood rules, maybe he shouldn't live there. Typical. They make everything about discrimination when they're the ones being aggressive. Just another entitled judge who thinks rules don't apply to him. Elijah handed the tablet back to Tanya, his expression carefully blank. It's starting. Starting? Dad, this is slander. We should… Grandpa? Noah's voice came from behind them. They turned to see him standing in the doorway, still in his pajamas, eyes wide and confused. Before Tanya could close the tablet, Noah pointed at it. I saw that. Why are people saying those things? His voice trembled slightly. Why do strangers hate you? You just made barbecue. Elijah crossed to his grandson and knelt down, meeting his eyes. Noah, sometimes people decide they don't like someone before they even know them. They tell stories that aren't true because they're afraid. Afraid of barbecue? Noah asked, his 11-year-old logic cutting through the pretense. Afraid of people who are different? Elijah said gently. Remember how we talked about this before? Noah nodded, but his eyes still showed confusion. But you're a judge. You help people. They said you're mean and scary. Tanya joined them, putting her arm around Noah's shoulders. Those people don't know your grandfather. They're just repeating lies. Will they make the police come back? Noah asked, the real fear showing now. Elijah hugged his grandson close. No one is taking me anywhere, Noah. I promise you that. But as he met Tanya's eyes over Noah's head, he knew the wound had cut deeper than any physical threat could. His grandson was seeing, perhaps for the first time, how easily truth could be buried under hatred. That afternoon, Elijah was sorting through legal documents in his home office when he noticed movement through the window. A police cruiser rolled slowly past the house, its driver clearly visible. Not Officer Phelps, but another officer, watching the property with obvious interest. Tanya noticed it too, from where she stood watering plants on the porch. She came inside, slamming the door harder than necessary. That's the second time in an hour, she said. They're trying to intimidate you. Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than afraid. Perhaps? The doorbell rang, and Elijah found Marisol on his porch, a worried look on her face. I saw the police car, she said, accepting his invitation to come inside. You should know something, Elijah. Diane's late husband, Richard Bellamy, was very connected. He donated to police charities, golfed with the chief, funded city council campaigns. That explains a few things, Elijah said, offering her a seat. Many of those relationships continued after he died, Marisol continued. Diane maintained them carefully. If you fight her, you fight more than just one woman. Elijah nodded. Thank you for telling me. After Marisol left, Elijah drove downtown to the police headquarters. Despite Tanya's concerns, he filed a formal complaint against Officer Phelps, detailing the false report, illegal entry onto private property, and the differential treatment based on race. This will be investigated thoroughly, Your Honor, the desk sergeant promised, though his eyes told a different story. That evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Elijah stepped onto his front porch. The night air was cool and still, broken only by the distant chirp of crickets. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed it. The same police cruiser from earlier, parked at the corner of his street, its headlights pointed directly at his house. He stood there, allowing himself to be seen, refusing to retreat inside. The silent standoff continued, the message clear from both sides. Neither would back down easily. Morning light streamed through the dining room windows as Elijah, Tanya, and Marisol hunched over the large oak table. What had once been a space for family meals now resembled a war room. Stacks of papers covered every inch of the polished surface. Years of HOA violation notices, meeting minutes, and financial records. Look at this, Elijah said, sliding a spreadsheet toward Tanya. His finger traced down a column of names and dates. The Washingtons got fined $250 for leaving their trash can out one extra day. But here, he flipped to another page. The Petersons, who lived 3 houses down, received just a warning for the same violation in the same month. Tanya squinted at the pages. And the Washingtons are black family. 2 kids. He's a doctor. Elijah's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. The Petersons are white. I checked every fine issued over the last 3 years. White homeowners received warnings 87% of the time for first offenses. Minorities received immediate fines 92% of the time. Marisol nodded as she sorted through her own pile. I've been calling people who moved away. So far, 6 former residents have agreed to talk about their experiences. Any patterns there? Elijah asked. All of them mentioned feeling unwelcome. 4 specifically said Diane targeted them with constant violations. Marisol pushed her reading glasses up her nose. Maria Gonzalez said she got 3 fines in 1 week for improper landscaping right after she put up Mexican flag decorations for her daughter's quinceañera. Tanya, who had been searching property records on her laptop, suddenly sat up straighter. Dad, I think I found something. She turned her screen so Elijah and Marisol could see. I've been tracking what happened to houses after people moved out. Look at the sale prices. The screen showed a spreadsheet of home sales in Hawthorne Ridge over the past 5 years. The homes sold by minorities and elderly residents who received multiple fines all sold for 15 to 20% below market value, Tanya explained. And then, look who purchased them. She scrolled right to reveal a column of company names: Hawthorne Acquisitions LLC, Ridge Valley Properties, Summit View Investments. Shell companies, Elijah said. Exactly. And guess who's connected to all 3? Tanya clicked to another tab showing corporate filings. Victor Manning, Diane's realtor friend. These houses were then renovated minimally and flipped for 30–40% profit within months. Elijah leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. So Diane isn't just pushing people out because of prejudice. She's making money from it. She finds targets, pressures them with fines and harassment until they want to leave. Then her friend swoops in to buy low and sell high, Tanya said, disgust evident in her voice. And the HOA board looks the other way, Marisol added. They worked through lunch, sorting evidence and building their case. Around 2 o'clock, a delivery person rang the doorbell. Tanya returned with a certified letter. Hawthorne Ridge HOA letterhead visible through the envelope window. Elijah opened it, his expression unchanging as he read. What does it say? Tanya asked. Diane demands I cease and desist from sharing confidential HOA information with unauthorized parties, Elijah said, placing the letter on the table. She claims I'm violating HOA bylaws and privacy regulations. What will you do? Marisol asked. Ignore it, Elijah said simply. These records reveal discriminatory enforcement patterns. That's not confidential. That's evidence. That evening, after dinner, they gathered in Elijah's study. The laptop on his desk displayed the face of Patricia Williams, a former resident who had taught high school English for 30 years before retiring. I lasted 8 months in Hawthorne Ridge, Patricia said, her voice clear through the speakers. At first, it was just small things, complaints about my wind chimes or my garden gnomes. Then came fines for my grandchildren visiting too often, for parking in my own driveway wrong, for my music being too loud when it wasn't even on. Elijah nodded. Did you ever appeal these fines? 3 times. The board always sided with Diane. Patricia's eyes showed old pain. The final straw was a $1,500 fine for structural modifications when I installed a wheelchair ramp after my hip surgery. They claimed I hadn't gotten proper approval, but I had submitted all the paperwork. "What happened to your home?" Tanya asked gently. "I couldn't afford to keep fighting. My fixed income barely covered the mortgage. Victor Manning offered to buy it as is for a quick sale." Patricia sighed. "I found out later he sold it for nearly $100,000 more just 4 months later." After they ended the call, the three sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Elijah reached for his legal pad. With slow, deliberate strokes, he wrote 3 words: pattern, profit, protection. 2 evenings later, the Hawthorne Ridge clubhouse buzzed with energy. Every chair was filled, and people lined the walls. Neighbors who normally skipped HOA meetings showed up early, claiming spots near the front. The air felt electric with anticipation. Elijah entered with Tanya and Marisol flanking him, a folder of documents tucked under his arm. Several residents nodded in greeting. A few even offered small smiles of support. "I never thought I'd see the clubhouse this packed," Marisol whispered. Tanya scanned the room, her doctor's eyes assessing the crowd. "Half these people never bothered to show up before. They're curious now." "No," Elijah replied quietly. "They're awake now." They found seats in the second row. Behind them, the double doors opened again. Diane Bellamy swept in wearing a crisp blue dress and pearl earrings, her smile as practiced as ever. But something was different. The usual nods of respect from her supporters seemed hesitant. The room didn't part for her, as it once had. Diane took her place at the center table, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. The HOA vice president called the meeting to order. "We've gathered tonight at the request of multiple homeowners regarding concerns about HOA leadership and enforcement practices." Diane's smile tightened. "I'm happy to address any misunderstandings." "These aren't misunderstandings," called a voice from the back. Heads turned to see Robert Chen, a quiet man who'd lived in Hawthorne Ridge for 15 years. "I've never spoken at these meetings before because I was afraid. Not anymore." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The vice president looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "We'll have structured comments. 3 minutes per person." One by one, neighbors approached the microphone. A retired couple described how Diane had fined them for having their grandchildren visit too often. A woman who'd lived there 5 years explained how her garden decorations were called tacky, while identical items in other yards went unnoticed. When Marisol's turn came, she stood tall despite her arthritis. Her voice was steady as she faced the room. "I've lived here 12 years. I've watched good people treated like trespassers in their own homes. I've kept records," she said, holding up a weathered notebook. "Dates, times, who was targeted, who wasn't. The pattern is clear. If Diane doesn't like you, especially if you're not white or not rich enough, she finds ways to make you miserable until you leave." Diane's face flushed. "That's absolutely untrue." "Let her finish," someone called out. Diane's mouth snapped shut. When Tanya took the microphone, her hands trembled with controlled anger. "My son Noah is 11 years old. He watched his grandfather, a federal judge who has served this country for decades, treated like a criminal in his own backyard. My son cried himself to sleep that night, terrified the police would come back and take his grandfather away." Her voice broke slightly. "All because Mrs. Bellamy decided a black family barbecuing didn't belong here." The room fell silent. On the projector screen, Patricia Williams appeared by video call, her teacher's voice clear and commanding as she detailed the harassment that drove her out. "I lost $43,000 in home equity when I was forced to sell quickly," she concluded. "And I later discovered my home was resold through a company connected to Diane's friend in real estate." 3 more former residents testified by video. Their stories painted a damning picture: targeted harassment, suspicious property transfers, and profits that always seemed to benefit the same small circle. When Elijah finally stood, He didn't need to raise his voice. The room was already hanging on his every word. "This isn't about barbecue smoke or garden gnomes or even about me," he said. "This is about using power to hurt people who are different. It's about turning neighbors into enemies. And according to your own bylaws, it's grounds for immediate removal of leadership." "I second the motion for removal," called Robert Chen. "Third," said another voice. The vice president looked shaken but nodded. "We'll proceed with the vote on removing Mrs. Bellamy as HOA president." For the first time, fear flashed across Diane's face. She glanced around the room, searching for allies and finding fewer than before. As paper ballots were passed around, she sat rigid in her chair, fingers gripping her pen too tightly. Elijah remained calm, watching silently. The testimonies had done their work. Neighbors who had once cowered now stood tall. The truth had broken through. The vice president stood at the front table, ready to collect and count the ballots. The room leaned forward in anticipation. Victory felt close enough to touch. The clubhouse doors swung open with a bang. Councilman Randall Pierce strode in, his tailored suit at odds with his flushed face. Under his arm, he carried a thick manila folder. Relief washed over Diane's face. "I apologize for my tardiness," Pierce announced, his politician's smile firmly in place. "But I believe I've arrived just in time with something relevant to this vote." He held up the folder. "I have here properly executed proxy votes from homeowners unable to attend tonight. I believe they should be counted before any decision is made." The clubhouse erupted in chaos. Shouts and protests filled the room as Councilman Randall Pierce stood at the front, holding the folder of proxy votes like a shield. "This is outrageous," someone yelled. "The vote was almost finished," called another. Pierce raised his hands for quiet, his politician's smile never wavering. "I understand your frustration, but these are properly executed proxy votes from homeowners who couldn't attend tonight. According to your own bylaws, they must be counted." Elijah rose from his seat, his calm presence drawing all eyes. "May I see those proxies, Councilman?" Pierce hesitated, then handed the folder to the vice president instead. "The board should review them first." Elijah stepped forward. "As a homeowner affected by this vote, I have the right to challenge these documents." "The timing is suspicious at best." The vice president flipped through the papers, her expression troubled. "They appear to be in order. 27 proxy votes, all supporting Mrs. Bellamy." "Convenient," Tanya muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Those signatures could have been collected under false pretenses," Elijah said. "Some homeowners may not have known what they were signing, or what was at stake." Pierce's smile hardened. "Are you accusing me of something, Judge Monroe? I'm questioning the validity of last-minute votes that appear when the outcome doesn't favor Mrs. Bellamy." The vice president looked uncomfortable. "The bylaws don't specify a deadline for proxy submissions." "Then I request we verify each signature by contacting the homeowners directly," Elijah said. Diane stood up, her confidence visibly restored. "That would be harassment. These votes are legal and must be counted now." The room's energy had shifted. Where minutes ago justice seemed within reach, now confusion and doubt spread through the crowd. After a tense discussion, the board counted the proxy votes. The final tally was announced with obvious reluctance. Diane Bellamy would remain HOA president by a margin of 14 votes. Diane's smile was triumphant as she returned to the podium. "Thank you for your confidence. Now, I have a serious matter to address." She fixed her gaze on Elijah. "Judge Monroe has violated HOA confidentiality by distributing private records. This is grounds for legal action against him and anyone who assisted him." Murmurs rippled through the room. Neighbors who had boldly testified earlier now avoided Elijah's eyes. "Furthermore," Diane continued, "I've been informed that Judge Monroe used his position to intimidate local law enforcement. This abuse of power cannot stand. As if on cue, Officer Phelps stepped forward from the back of the room. I've filed a formal complaint with the Police Oversight Committee. Judge Monroe threatened me with his federal authority during a routine call. Elijah stood again. That's simply not true. But the damage was spreading. Neighbors began slipping out the door, fearful expressions on their faces. "This meeting is adjourned," Diane announced, gathering her papers with a satisfied expression. Outside, Pierce cornered Elijah. "You should have just enjoyed your retirement, Judge. Not everyone is cut out for neighborhood politics." "This isn't politics," Elijah replied. "It's discrimination with a paper trail." Pierce's friendly mask slipped. "Drop it, Monroe. You're making powerful enemies." The next morning brought more trouble. Marisol arrived at Elijah's door, clutching a notice. "They're inspecting my house tomorrow for violations," she said, her hands shaking. "My fence, my garden, everything. I can't afford these fines, Elijah." "We'll fight this together," he promised, though worry gnawed at him. By afternoon, worse news came. Tanya burst through the door, her face tight with anger. "They suspended Noah from school for 3 days, she said, throwing her purse on the counter. "He shoved a boy who was telling everyone his grandpa was a criminal who bullied neighbors." Elijah's heart sank. "Did you speak with the principal?" She was very concerned about Noah's violent response. "When I mentioned the boy was repeating lies, she said they couldn't police playground talk." Tanya paced the kitchen. "I did some digging. Guess who sits on the private school board? Diane's niece." Elijah closed his eyes briefly. "They're coming at us from all sides." "Mom, it's not fair," Noah said from the doorway, his eyes red from crying. "Tommy said you were going to jail because you're a bad judge. I only pushed him because he wouldn't stop." Elijah kneeled to meet Noah's eyes. "I'm not going anywhere. And you know the truth, even when others don't." That night, after Noah and Tanya had gone to bed, Elijah wandered into the room that was supposed to be Nadine's study. Boxes remained unpacked, her books still in cartons. He'd avoided this space since moving in, unable to face the emptiness where her presence should be. He opened a box labeled Personal and found her journal on top. The leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling. He sat on the floor among the unpacked boxes and opened it to a random page, needing her wisdom more than ever. Elijah traced her handwriting with his finger, remembering her steady voice, her unwavering courage. The light from the hallway cast long shadows as he turned the pages, wondering if this fight was costing too much. Noah suspended, Marisol threatened, neighbors turning away in fear. Was justice worth the pain it was causing those he loved? Elijah stared at the page, his eyes lingering on Nadine's flowing handwriting. Her journal entry from 3 years ago seemed written for this exact moment. "Sometimes peace isn't about avoiding the storm, Elijah. Sometimes peace means standing exactly where trouble finds you and refusing to be moved. That's what you've always done in your courtroom. Truth doesn't run from lies. It stands firm until lies crumble against it." Tears welled in his eyes. He wiped them away with the back of his hand, smiling through the ache in his chest. Even now, Nadine knew exactly what he needed to hear. "You were always the brave one," he whispered to the empty room. As he closed the journal, a photo slipped from between its pages and landed on the floor. It was a picture from the day they closed on this house, taken in the backyard. Elijah and Nadine stood by the fence, arms around each other, both beaming with hope for their new beginning. But something in the background caught his eye. He squinted, holding the photo closer to the light. There, just visible on Marisol's back porch, was a small security camera mounted near her roofline. It was angled downward, facing directly toward Diane's driveway and the street between their properties. Elijah checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. Too late to knock on Marisol's door, but his mind raced with possibilities. If that camera was still there, if it had been recording on the day of the barbecue. Sleep came fitfully that night. At first light, Elijah dressed quickly and walked next door to Marisol's house. Despite the early hour, lights shone in her kitchen window. He knocked gently. Marisol opened the door, already dressed in a colorful housecoat, coffee mug in hand. "Elijah, is everything all right? I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I noticed something in an old photo. The security camera on your back porch. Is it still there?" Her eyes widened with understanding. "Yes, it's been there for 3 years. I installed it after Diane spray-painted my mailbox because my roses grew too close to the sidewalk." She denied it, of course. "The police did nothing." "Does it record continuously?" Elijah asked, hardly daring to hope. "Every second. It stores footage for 30 days before recording over it." She set her coffee down. The barbecue, it would have captured everything. 20 minutes later, they sat in Marisol's small home office, staring at her computer screen as she navigated through stored video files. "There," she said, clicking on a folder. "This is from that Sunday." The footage was crystal clear. From this angle, they could see Diane's backyard, part of Elijah's, and the street between their houses. Marisol fast-forwarded until they spotted movement. "Look," Elijah pointed. "She's watching us set up the grill." The video showed Diane peering over her fence repeatedly, making phone calls while staring at Elijah's yard. When Tanya and Noah arrived, Diane disappeared into her house, emerging minutes later with her phone. "Stop there," Elijah said. Marisol paused the playback. On screen, Diane stood by her fence with her phone pressed to her ear. What chilled Elijah was the expression on her face. Not fear, not concern, but a small, satisfied smile. They watched as she spoke into the phone, occasionally glancing at Elijah's yard. Then another neighbor approached her fence. With the camera's microphone, they caught Diane's words clearly. "This is how you stop it early. Let them know they don't belong from day one." The neighbor looked uncomfortable, but nodded. They continued watching as police cars arrived. The footage clearly showed Officer Phelps pushing open Elijah's side gate without knocking or announcing himself. A clear violation of protocol and property rights. "This is everything we need," Elijah said quietly. "This proves the call was deliberate harassment, not a misunderstanding. And it shows that officer had no legal right to enter your property," Marisol added. Just then, a small voice came from the doorway. "I have more." They turned to see Noah standing there, still in his pajamas. Tanya stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "Noah," Elijah said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Mom saw you come over," Noah explained. "I told her I needed to show you something." He held up his tablet. "I was filming you at the grill that day. I wanted to make a video about our new house. I kept recording when that lady came over, and when the police came, too." Noah's voice trembled slightly, but his eyes held determination far beyond his 11 years. "I got everything they said, Grandpa. Everything." Back at Elijah's house, they gathered in the living room. Noah's tablet connected to the large television, ready to share what he had captured. Tanya sat beside her son on the couch, one arm protectively wrapped around his shoulders. Marisol perched on the armchair, her face set with determination. Elijah stood by the television, his hands steady, but his heart racing. "Are you sure you want to watch this?" Elijah asked, looking at each of them. "It's going to be hard." "We need to see it all," Tanya said firmly. "Every ugly word." Noah nodded, his small face serious. "I'm not scared, Grandpa." Elijah pressed play. The video started with Noah filming Elijah at the grill, smoke rising gently, laughter in the background. The camera wobbled as Noah moved around, capturing the backyard scene. Then came Diane's voice, sharp and hostile from off-screen. "Excuse me! Who gave you permission to use that yard?" The tablet shook as Noah turned toward the fence. Diane's face filled the frame, her eyes cold with disdain. "I own this home," Elijah's calm voice responded. "That's impossible," Diane snapped. "This house wasn't for sale to—" She stopped herself, but her meaning hung in the air. The video continued, capturing every moment in devastating clarity. When Diane pulled out her phone, Noah had kept filming, hiding partially behind a chair. Her words were perfectly clear. "There's a suspicious man in the yard next door. He's holding a metal object and refusing to leave." Then later, as the police approached, the camera caught Diane muttering to another neighbor. "People like that always say they belong. You have to show them they don't." Tanya made a choked sound, her eyes filling with tears. She pulled Noah closer. When Officer Phelps entered without permission, ordering Elijah away from his own grill, the humiliation was palpable. Noah's small hand could be seen trembling as he held the tablet, but he had kept filming. When the video ended, silence filled the room. Tears streaked Tanya's face. Marisol looked down at her clasped hands. Noah stared at the blank screen. Elijah knelt in front of his grandson. "Noah, what you did that day was brave and important. You preserved the truth when others tried to hide it." "I was scared," Noah admitted, his voice small. "But I remembered what you taught me about evidence." Elijah nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Evidence matters. Truth matters." He looked at all of them. "And now we use it carefully. We should post this online right now," Tanya insisted, her voice hard with anger. "Let everyone see what she did." Elijah shook his head. "No. We need to be strategic. If we just post it, Diane can claim it's edited or taken out of context. We need official channels first." Over the next hours, Elijah meticulously organized the evidence. He created copies of Marisol's security footage and Noah's video, combining them with the HOA records showing the pattern of discrimination, the property transfer documents, and statements from former residents. "Where are you sending all this?" Marisol asked, as Elijah prepared separate files. "To every authority that needs to see it," he replied. "The State Civil Rights Division, Police Oversight Board, City Inspector General, Real Estate Fraud Investigators." He paused. "And one journalist I trust, Amara Wilson at the Tribune." "Why a journalist?" Noah asked. "Because sunlight is the best disinfectant," Elijah explained. "Official investigations happen behind closed doors. The public needs to know, too." Tanya paced the room. "This is taking too long. Diane is still out there, hurting people." "I understand your frustration," Elijah said patiently. "But if we rush this and make mistakes, she escapes consequences. The evidence must be impossible to dismiss." By evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, Elijah's phone buzzed with an email. Amara Wilson from the Tribune had responded. "Judge Monroe, this evidence is compelling. I'd like to interview you and the former residents you mentioned. This pattern of discrimination deserves public scrutiny. Can we meet tomorrow?" Elijah showed the email to the others. A small flame of hope kindled in the room. Just as they finished dinner, another email arrived. Elijah opened it, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "What is it?" Tanya asked. "The City Council," Elijah said, looking up from his phone. "They've scheduled a public hearing about complaints at Hawthorne Ridge. Next Tuesday at 10 a.m. City Hall loomed large and imposing against the morning sky. Elijah straightened his tie as he stepped out of the car, his face a mask of calm determination. Beside him, Tanya's eyes darted nervously at the crowd gathering outside the entrance. Noah clutched his grandfather's hand, looking small in his pressed button-up shirt. Marisol adjusted her glasses, her folder of evidence tucked under her arm. Looks like word got out, Tanya muttered. Reporters clustered near the entrance, cameras flashing as they spotted Elijah. A woman thrust a microphone toward him. Judge Monroe, is it true you're accusing the Hawthorne Ridge HOA of discrimination? Elijah raised a hand politely. I'll answer questions after the hearing. Thank you. More reporters shouted questions as they made their way through the crowd. Noah pressed closer to Elijah's side, uncomfortable with the attention. It's okay, Elijah reassured him. They're just doing their jobs. Inside the building, the marble floors echoed with footsteps. People filled the hallways, some wearing expressions of support, others looking skeptical or hostile. Elijah spotted several former Hawthorne Ridge residents who had agreed to testify. The council chamber doors stood open. Inside, rows of seats faced the raised semicircular table where council members would sit. The room buzzed with voices and tension. There she is, Marisol whispered, nodding toward the front row. Diane Bellamy sat perfectly poised in a cream-colored suit, her silver hair arranged in an elegant twist. She looked like she belonged in a magazine about successful businesswomen, not someone accused of systematic discrimination. Two men in suits flanked her. Lawyers, most likely. Elijah guided his family to seats on the opposite side. He noticed Officer Phelps sitting with a group of police representatives, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. The officer avoided eye contact. The room fell quiet as Councilman Pierce and the other council members filed in. Pierce's face looked tighter than usual, his smile strained as he took his seat at the center of the raised platform. His eyes briefly met Elijah's before darting away. This special hearing of the City Council will now come to order, announced the council secretary. We're addressing complaints regarding Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association practices and related matters. Pierce tapped his microphone. Before we begin, I want to note that while I have connections to Hawthorne Ridge, I've been advised I need not recuse myself, as this is an informational hearing only. Tanya scoffed under her breath. Elijah placed a calming hand on her arm. We'll first hear from Mrs. Diane Bellamy, president of the Hawthorne Ridge HOA, Pierce continued. Diane approached the podium with practiced grace. Her voice came out steady and sympathetic, perfectly calibrated to sound reasonable. Council members, thank you for this opportunity. What began as a simple safety concern has spiraled into something unrecognizable. She sighed dramatically. I made one call, as any concerned citizen might do, when I observed an unfamiliar situation. Since then, Judge Monroe has used his considerable status to wage what feels like a personal vendetta against me and our community. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Diane continued, her voice trembling slightly. I've dedicated years to maintaining our neighborhood standards. Now I'm being portrayed as some kind of monster for following proper procedures. This has been deeply hurtful to me and my reputation. When Diane finished, Pierce nodded sympathetically. Thank you, Mrs. Bellamy. Now we'll hear from Judge Elijah Monroe. Elijah stood, straightened his suit jacket, and walked deliberately to the podium. The room fell silent under his calm, authoritative presence. Council members, citizens, he began, his deep voice filling the room without strain. This case is not about barbecue smoke or a single frightened phone call. It's about a powerful resident who systematically uses police calls and HOA rules to make certain people feel unsafe in their own homes. Elijah looked directly at Diane. The evidence will show that Mrs. Bellamy has targeted minority homeowners with discriminatory enforcement, causing many to sell their homes at a loss. These properties were then acquired through companies connected to her associates. Diane suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her composed facade cracking. You people always make everything about race. The room went completely still. Elijah turned slowly to face her. What people? Mrs. Bellamy? He asked quietly. The words hung in the air. Diane's face flushed red as she realized her mistake. Pierce cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Bellamy, please take your seat. You'll have an opportunity to respond. No, Diane interrupted. I won't sit here and be accused of— Mrs. Bellamy, Pierce repeated more firmly, please sit down. Diane reluctantly returned to her seat, her lawyers whispering urgently to her. Elijah continued, as if the interruption hadn't happened. The evidence will speak for itself. Not opinions or accusations, but documented facts. He nodded to the city clerk, who moved to the light controls. The large screen at the front of the chamber lit up. With the council's permission, I'd like to present video evidence first, Elijah said. Pierce hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. The city clerk dimmed the lights, and Marisol's porch camera footage began playing on the public screen. The room fell into stunned silence as the video played on the large screen. There was Diane, clear as day, watching Elijah's family before making her call to the police. Her face held no fear, only determination and a hint of satisfaction. Then came the damning smile as she spoke into her phone, her body language relaxed and confident. This is how you stop it early. Diane's voice rang out as she spoke to another neighbor, the audio surprisingly clear from Marisol's security camera. Gasps rippled through the audience. Diane's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear, but she brushed him away, her face hardening into a mask. The footage continued, showing Officer Phelps striding through Elijah's gate without hesitation, without knocking, without permission. A clear violation of protocol. When Marisol's video ended, Elijah nodded to the clerk. Now, if I may, there's additional footage my grandson captured that day. Noah's tablet video appeared on screen. The angle was low, filmed by a child's hands, giving the footage an even more powerful impact. It captured Diane saying clearly, "People like that always say they belong," while Elijah stood calmly by his grill. The council members exchanged glances. Pierce stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, refusing to look at Diane. "I'd like to call my daughter, Dr. Tanya Monroe, to speak," Elijah said when the video ended. Tanya approached the podium, her white doctor's coat still on from her hospital shift. Her voice steady, despite her obvious emotion. "My son Noah is 11 years old," she began. "That day, he watched police officers treat his grandfather, his hero, like a criminal in his own backyard. He cried himself to sleep that night, asking me if Grandpa would be taken away. No child should fear losing family because someone decided they don't belong in their own home." Marisol testified next, her voice shaking slightly, but her words clear. "For 7 years, I've documented Diane Bellamy's campaign against homeowners she doesn't approve of. My mailbox was vandalized when I first spoke up. My garden destroyed. But I kept records because someone needed to remember what was happening to us." 3 former residents appeared via video conference, sharing nearly identical stories. Endless HOA violations, police calls for minor issues, pressure until they sold their homes at losses. "I lost $40,000 on my house," said the retired postal worker. "Had to move in with my daughter. Next month, that same house sold for $60,000 more than I got." A hush fell over the room as a woman with press credentials approached the podium. "I'm Janet Kwan, investigative reporter with the Metro Times. Over the past week, I've confirmed a pattern of property transfers following HOA harassment." She displayed documents on the screen showing homes targeted by Diane were purchased through shell companies connected to Diane's realtor friend, then flipped for substantial profits. "More concerning," Janet continued, "are these financial records showing campaign donations from these same shell companies to Councilman Pierce's re-election fund." The room erupted. Pierce's face drained of color. Emails appeared on screen showing Pierce's office had repeatedly delayed investigations into HOA complaints. "Mr. Pierce," one council member asked, "did you know about these connections when you brought those proxy votes to keep Mrs. Bellamy in power?" Pierce stared at his hands. "I have no comment at this time." Diane turned to Pierce, her eyes pleading, but he wouldn't look at her. The safety net she'd counted on had vanished. After a brief recess, the council reconvened. The senior councilwoman leaned into her microphone. "Based on today's evidence, this council is making immediate referrals to the Ethics Commission, Civil Rights Division, Police Oversight Board, and Fraud Investigation Unit. Mrs. Bellamy is removed from all HOA authority pending full legal review. Officer Phelps is placed on administrative leave while the police department conducts its own investigation." Diane stood abruptly, gathering her purse. Her lawyers followed as she marched toward the exit. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. "Mrs. Bellamy, did you target minority homeowners? Is it true you profited from forced sales? Did you make false police reports?" She pushed through them without answering, her face rigid, her fortress of privilege crumbling around her. Across the plaza, Elijah emerged from the building. Noah rushed to his side, and Elijah took his grandson's small hand in his. They walked together through the afternoon sunlight, past the cameras and microphones. "Did we win, Grandpa?" Noah asked. "Truth won today," Elijah answered, squeezing the boy's hand. "And that's what matters most." The late summer sun warmed Elijah's shoulders as he stood in his backyard, exactly where he had stood 6 weeks earlier. This time, there were no suspicious glances from neighbors, no angry voices, no police sirens, just the peaceful sizzle of the grill and the gentle murmur of conversation as guests arrived through his open gate. "Grandpa, is it hot enough yet?" Noah called from the patio table where he arranged paper plates and plastic cups. "Almost," Elijah answered, checking the temperature gauge. The boy looked different now, shoulders relaxed, smile easy. The fear that had haunted his eyes for weeks had finally faded. Tanya emerged from the house carrying a tray of raw burgers. "Principal called today," she said, placing the tray beside the grill. "Noah's permanent record is completely clean. That suspension never happened." "Good," Elijah nodded. "It should never have happened in the first place." The school had reversed Noah's suspension 3 days after the hearing, once the truth about Diane's niece on the school board came to light. The woman had resigned her position last week, amid the growing scandal. Marisol Reyes appeared at the gate, carrying a large glass dish. "I hope everyone likes flan," she called, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. "My mother's recipe." "Marisol," Tanya hurried to help her. "That looks amazing." "Not as amazing as the new HOA rules," Marisol said, setting down her dessert. "The interim board sent them this morning. No more arbitrary fines. Every complaint gets reviewed by 3 different members, and they're forming a diversity committee to make sure enforcement is fair." "About time," said a man entering through the gate. Elijah recognized him immediately, the retired postal worker from Marisol's video testimony. Behind him came the Filipino nurse and the Latino contractor, former residents who had been driven away but returned today as honored guests. "Judge Monroe," the postal worker extended his hand. "Never thought I'd be back in this neighborhood." "Gerald," Elijah clasped his hand warmly. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't miss it," Gerald answered. "Heard Pierce stepped down from his housing committee. Trying to save what's left of his career, I guess." "Yes," Elijah nodded. "And the investigation into those shell companies is moving forward. Diane's realtor friend has already made a deal to testify." A middle-aged couple from 3 doors down approached hesitantly. The woman clutched a covered dish, her eyes downcast. "Judge Monroe," the man began. We brought potato salad, if that's okay. Of course, Elijah gestured toward the table. We also, the woman paused. We wanted to say, we're sorry. We saw what happened that first day. We heard Diane on the phone with the police. We knew she was lying, but we didn't speak up. We were afraid, her husband added. Diane had been president for so long. She had ways of making life difficult. Elijah regarded them quietly. Fear is a powerful silencer, he said finally. What matters is that you're speaking now. More neighbors arrived, many bringing food and similar apologies. Elijah accepted them without dismissing the harm that silence had caused. The accountability felt important, not to punish, but to acknowledge a community's responsibility to protect all its members. Tanya approached, her phone in hand. Just got an email from City Hall, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The council voted unanimously. They're establishing a legal defense fund for residents facing discriminatory housing abuse. She swallowed hard. They're naming it after Mom. The Nadine Monroe Community Justice Fund. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of his late wife's presence. When he opened them, he saw Noah watching him. Dad, Tanya touched his arm, Mom would be so proud of what you did. What we all did, Elijah corrected gently. The grill reached perfect temperature. Elijah placed the first burgers on the hot surface, and they sizzled satisfyingly. Noah edged closer, watching the process with fascination. Can I help? He asked, eyes fixed on the cooking meat. Here, Elijah said, holding out the grilling tongs, the same ones Diane had once pointed to as a weapon, the same ones that had been part of his humiliation. You want to flip them when they look ready? Noah took the tongs carefully, his small hands gripping the metal with determination. What had once been treated as a threat was now simply a tool for cooking, for gathering, for making a home. Around them, the backyard filled with conversation and laughter. Former residents traded stories with current ones. Children played on the grass. The smoke from the grill rose peacefully into the clear blue sky above Hawthorne Ridge. Elijah stood back, watching his grandson proudly turn each burger with careful concentration. Justice had many forms, he thought. Sometimes it came through courts and hearings and official findings. But sometimes it was simpler. The right to stand in your own backyard without fear, to gather with neighbors without threat, to pass cooking tongs to your grandson and see only joy in his eyes. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.